Causes of the Rape of Nanking. Introduction. What was the Nanking Massacre? During the Second Sino-Japanese War, Imperial Japanese troops raided the capital city of China, Nanking. The Imperial Japanese troops were ordered by their military leader, Matsu Iwane. Over a 6-week period, starting on December 9th, 1937, Japanese troops murdered and raped innocent civilians and soldiers in the city of Nanking. The atrocities that occurred would be etched in history forever. An estimated 300,000 lives were taken during this massacre. Not only were Chinese soldiers brutally murdered, kids were killed and women were raped. Making their way through the city, the Imperial troops looted buildings, then burned the city to ruins.
One of the causes of the rape of Nanking was the Japanese education system. Ever since it had invaded Korea, Japan planned to invade Manchuria. In fact, it was so planned that they staged a bombing and blamed it on China as a pretext for war. Because Japan had had this plan to invade Manchuria for quite some time, they were able to use the public school system, especially elementary schools, to teach kids nationalism and patriotism in order to prepare them to fight in a war with China. Starting in elementary school, military heroes were frequently celebrated, and many elementary schools took students to attend send-offs and funerals of local soldiers, especially once war had begun. Children sang many war songs and were encouraged to draw scenes depicting military-type things, whether that be soldiers or scenes of battle. In general, patriotic loyalty was instilled at every opportunity, whether it be at sporting events that kids had, in school newspapers and magazines. It was just always looking for new opportunities to instill loyalty and patriotism. Not everyone attended the secondary schools. Everyone attended elementary school, but not all of them. But many poor children did not attend secondary schools. For those who attended more elite secondary schools, some of the uniforms were military-style uniforms, sort of to get the kids in that sort of spirit and to get them used to wearing military uniforms. Additionally, boys began performing military drills and marches around this time, although some did do it in elementary school. Overall, many of the things that had begun in elementary school were continued in secondary schools. High school, an even smaller portion of the population, attended it less than secondary school. However, the number of kids attending these schools did increase with the creation of new military cadet schools. These schools were designed, obviously, to train soldiers, and more of them were built in order to create a larger professional army. A group called the Pioneer Youth Corps of Manchuria, Mongolia, was established in 1938 to encourage young men from usually ages 14 to around 2021 to settle Manchuria. Many of them came back, and it did not reach its numbers that it expected to achieve, but it did collaborate closely with many schools in order to promote immigration and anti-Chinese sentiment generally. There were some part-time schools set up for boys mostly who worked. They were mostly military with some occupational learning and were designed to train boys to be in the military. In general, magazines, books, newspapers, and even movies all ran very patriotic stories that encouraged nationalism. Newspapers even held competitions for kids to write patriotic and military songs, which were then sung mostly in elementary schools. And kids were even discouraged from bringing good food to lunch to encourage them to get used to eating army rations. That is how much kids were really conditioned to be in the army. It was very much an expectation, like, oh, you're going to fight China when you get older. So how did all of this lead to genocide? Well, rise in nationalism almost always corresponds to a rise in the hatred of other nations. In the case of Japan, it was China. Japan had had this plan for a very long time. They had always wanted to create the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere in order to achieve autarky. So they started instilling this patriotism into kids at a very, very young age, where they were yet too young to question it. And when you've been taught something your entire life from such a young age, and you've never heard anything that might question that might question the authority of what you've heard, that's how people are conditioned to commit atrocities upon other people. It's when they've been dehumanized and you've never heard anything that might indicate that these people were in fact human. You've never heard anything that might indicate otherwise.
Japanese fascism, supremacist nationalism was a large, prominent issue among all of Japan prior to the raping of Nanking. One of the many right-wing political parties was Tohokai, also known as Society of the East. It was a Japanese political party founded in 1936, which was around the start of the year before the raping of the Nanking had occurred. And this political party, along with other extreme right-wing political parties, spread the extreme ideologies of pride, monarchism, fascism, and most importantly, Nazism, which was an ideology inspired from Nazi Germany. And essentially what the Japanese far-right political party believed was that they were superior or better than other world powers and essentially were the best in their point of view. The leader of this political group was Nakano Saigo, and they were known for oppressing any other political group that countered their views, such as the left wing, through physical force as well. So the Japanese fascism's effect on Japan was that it spread rampantly among the government and through society, becoming highly influential. The right-wing ideology of this fascist nationalist views had often oppressed the left-wing ideology and causing it to slowly spread through being taught in schools, through propaganda, and also through fear-mongering due to the Japanese army known as the Kwantung Army, built on fascist ideologies and essentially their own power. They were stationed along the Chinese-Japanese-owned South Manchuria Railroad, where this radical army bombed their own railroad and falsely accused China of the attack, giving them their motive to invade Manchuria and essentially start the invasion of China. So this Japanese fascism's effect on China was very bad. There was a growing radical and fascist ideology that caused Japan to isolate and separate from other world powers, such as the League of Nations, leaving them politically isolated and giving the ability for the nationalistic ideologies to grow in Japan. This automatically caused the result of Japanese expansionist views to grow rapidly, making it feel almost through Japan's fascism ideology that they were almost entitled to the land around them and to be expanding, taking control of nations around them. The result was China being a target for Japanese expansion, igniting the Second Sino-Japanese War of 1937, which resulted in the Japanese military committing the raping of Nanking massacre.
The invasion of Manchuria. So why Japan invaded Manchuria? Well, Japan had planned out the invasion for quite a while by incorporating it into their education system. And for the exact reason on why they did plan on invading was because Japan was going through a depression and had not been doing well economically. So Japan wanted to expand their control over to Manchuria. They did not want to be seen as aggressive by other countries or be stopped by the League of Nations. So they planned the Mukden incident, in which they planted bombs on their own railroads located near Mukden to make it seem like China were those who first attacked. So the Mukden incident then gave them a reason to invade Manchuria. It would allow for them to produce oil, rubber, and lumber, which were the resources that they severely lacked and that Manchuria would have to offer. The significance: the invasion was one of the causes for the start of World War II. It also initiated the conflict between China and Japan, where Japan would end up taking a good portion of China during World War II to seek control. That eventually led Japan to the rape of Nanking, which again demonstrated Japan's desire for control and nationalistic views.
In 1928, Nanking became the capital of China. By the mid-1930s, the population of the city grew from 250,000 to over 1 million. This was due to Japanese occupation in China. The occupation had caused refugees to flee towards Nanking. China had begun a resistance to Japan's expansion of territory, and beginning in 1931, Imperial Japanese forces captured major cities in China and began to move southward. At this time, the Second Sino-Japanese War had occurred. The start of the war, considered to be the Marco Polo Bridge incident in 1937, that led to a full-scale invasion. This war was a result of Japanese imperialist policies, and it lasted 8 years, from July 7, 1937 to September 9, 1945. The anti-Japanese resistance war began in 1937 as well. In August of that year, the Japanese had invaded Shanghai, and by mid-November, they captured it. Japan then moved on to Nanjing. Warplanes flew over the most populated parts that held citizens and refugees and dropped bombs. This led to hundreds of civilian casualties. And by November, Japan pressed on to fully invade Nanjing and attacked from 3 sides. By December 13, 1937, Japan captured Nanjing and began the widespread massacre and rape of thousands of civilians. This continued for a period of over 6 weeks.
In conclusion, Nanking Massacre causes. To this day, historians still debate the real reason the mass genocide occurred in Nanking. However, there are a few driving factors that are related to the cause of this massacre. Firstly, Japanese held a very corrupt education system, which taught the population to have a deep hatred for the Chinese. Secondly, the rise of ultra-nationalistic military leaders. These leaders emerged sharing very xenophobic beliefs which wore off on the Japanese people. Lastly, the invasion of Manchuria. This invasion started the Japanese aggression. From then, they engaged in several battles and ultimately ended up in a war with China. Overall, the ideologies that the Japanese held were a direct result of their actions. The Nanking Massacre was a horrific genocide of innocent people and will be debated through history forever.